When Deputy Presley pulled over Aria Sullivan on a dark road in Gerbera County, he thought it would be business as usual. A silent town, a quick cover-up, another innocent citizen terrified into submission. He never asked who she was engaged to. Now Aria lies dead, and her fiancé, Ashaya Hill, the deadliest Delta Force commander ever deployed, is unleashing a storm no crooked sheriff or bought-off politician can contain. They thought they owned this county, that every piece of evidence could vanish, but they're about to learn the hard way. You don't murder a soldier's love and walk away. Ashaya isn't hunting revenge. She's dismantling an entire system. And, in Gerbera County, if you're part of the cover-up, you'd better run, because this time, justice comes armed. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. It was the quiet that unnerved her most tonight. She flicked off the old truck's radio, letting the hush swallow her. On the seat beside her lay a simple brown paper bag containing 2 cheeseburgers and a side of fries, dinner for her and her fiancé. Even as hunger gnawed at her, she had no appetite for fast food. Not after the phone call she'd just received from the local elementary school's principal. Something about the principal's voice had struck her as off, a forced neutrality, a caution that spelled trouble. She needed to check on Aria, her fiancé, who taught music there. Ashaya was new to this sleepy farmland county, but not naive to its politics. Gerbera County's population of barely 30,000 was overshadowed by farmland, rolling fields, and a single highway that snaked through the main township. At first glance it seemed picturesque, with neat streets, polite neighbors, a historical courthouse, and a downtown wrapped in bright bunting. But she had come here after retiring from Delta Force, chasing the quiet life. She'd envisioned something better, a calm place for Aria to teach, a chance to volunteer her own specialized skill set in some kind of youth outreach. Even if she never talked openly about her classified missions, she wanted to be a positive influence. She'd craved normalcy after years of near-constant deployment. She realized, ironically, that she'd never truly get rid of that hypervigilance hammered into her bones by all the training. Yes, she had set aside the insignia of her old life, but the tension in her shoulders tonight reminded her that war had never truly ended for her. She just happened to leave its official battlefield behind. The battered truck rolled to a stop in front of the small ranch house she shared with Aria. The porch light glowed warmly against the gloom of twilight, highlighting the swirl of fallen leaves. She saw her fiancé's silhouette in the window, a slight woman, brilliant in mind and soul. That silhouette was a beacon of safety for Ashaya. It promised quiet nights reading together on the sofa, promised the life she had yearned for amid the hot zones of Afghanistan and the dusty edges of the Middle East. Her phone buzzed just as she cut the engine. She flicked her eyes toward the screen. Principal Allen read the caller ID. She thumbed the phone to silent. She'd call back in a minute. She needed just a second, a breath, to remember why she was here and to brace herself for whatever small-town problem was unfolding. Inside, Aria greeted her with a concerned smile. "You look tired, baby," she said, taking the paper bag. She was petite, with deep brown skin, intelligent eyes behind glasses, and a swirl of braids pinned up in a neat style. "Something happened at the store?" Ashaya set her keys on the small kitchen table. The house was modest, its floors scuffed from the previous owners, and every decorative touch an extension of Aria's character. Brightly colored music-themed paintings, crocheted blankets, clay mugs from her students. "I'm not sure," she answered. "Principal Allen called me, sounding urgent. Didn't say much. Maybe it's about those rumors. The new sheriff's come down hard on certain teachers." Aria tensed. "I've heard the rumors. Several staff members have been singled out for giving unpatriotic lessons, whatever that means. But it's all hush-hush. The new sheriff has the Board of Education in his pocket, apparently. They've started—" She paused, unsure. "I don't want to think about it until we confirm. Let's just take it day by day, okay?" Ashaya nodded and reached out to clasp Aria's hand. "Sure." She softened her voice. "Hey, if anything ever feels off, you tell me. You know that, right?" Aria's eyes flicked to the clock. "I should return some parent phone calls tonight. But let's eat. I'm hungry, and I know you're starved after the day you had." They spread the wrappers on the table. The hush Ashaya felt outside pressed in again, prickling her senses. But she forced herself to take a bite, to be present, to appreciate the moment. She had no clue that their life was on the precipice of a nightmare. She never could have guessed that by the end of the week, her fiancé would be gunned down by the very people entrusted to protect them. 4 days later, Ashaya found herself in the principal's office for a meeting scheduled early in the morning. Normally, she wouldn't step in so directly. Arya was the teacher, after all. But the principal specifically requested her presence. She sat stiffly in the cramped chair in front of Principal Allen's desk. Principal Nancy Allen was a wiry woman in her 50s, with deep lines of stress etched across her brow. She had always seemed kind enough, dedicated to the kids, to the teachers. But right now, fear haunted her gaze. "I called you because there's been, some trouble, Ms. Hill," Principal Allen began. Arya brought attention to certain funding irregularities involving the district and a private contracting company that supplies textbooks. She suspected kickbacks. Ashaya's jaw tensed. "Okay, that's big. But why am I here?" Allen folded her hands, inhaling shakily. "We're part of a small community, Ms. Hill. Folks are close with each other. The new sheriff, Bartell, took office last year on a tough-on-crime platform. Some people say his department is not entirely on the up and up. I don't have proof. But Arya's concerns about how these deals tie back to Sheriff Bartell's cousin, the county procurement officer, are enough to rattle some powerful people." Ashaya felt her temperature spike. "You're telling me Arya is in some sort of danger because she questioned corruption?" Principal Allen's eyes darted to the window, as if worried someone might see her. "I pray it won't go that far. But I've already been pressured to discipline her for so-called unprofessional inquiries. People are saying she's stirring up trouble." Ashaya exhaled, trying not to let her anger show. "Thank you for telling me. We'll keep an eye out." Allen placed a trembling hand on Ashaya's. "She's a gem, Ms. Hill. She's the best music teacher we've had in decades. And you, well, you have a military background, yes?" Ashaya nodded slowly. "Retired. Wasn't exactly a desk job either." A flicker of relief crossed Allen's face. "I figured. I just thought you should know in case something—" She cut herself off. "If things escalate, we're going to need your help." Ashaya clenched her teeth. "Ma'am, I promise you, no one hurts Arya." That evening, Ashaya arrived home to find Arya shaken. The news had hit her from another angle. Phone calls from the district attorney's office. Allegedly, a new complaint had surfaced that she was teaching divisive content about the civil rights era. Completely fabricated, of course. "They can't do this," Arya fumed. She was usually mild, but now she paced the living room, her hands tight at her sides. "I was teaching a standard lesson about the sit-ins, and now they're twisting it, saying I was inciting protest in kids." Ashaya got up to intercept her, pulling her gently into a hug. "Breathe," she whispered. "Let's handle this step by step." Arya's eyes brimmed with tears of frustration. "All I did was ask questions about questionable funds. Then suddenly I'm a radical in the classroom?" Ashaya felt an old but familiar burn in her gut. The heat of injustice, the sense that the system might be rigged. She forced calm into her voice. "We'll gather evidence. We'll talk to a lawyer." "Which lawyer?" "Everyone knows the new district attorney, Malcolm Roth, is tight with the sheriff. He picks judges. He influences the local bench. So we find someone beyond the local network," Ashaya said. "I can drive you to the next county over tomorrow. We'll find a lawyer who's not compromised." Arya nodded, her breath shuddering. "God, I hate this. I hate that we have to do any of this. I just wanted to teach music." Ashaya squeezed her shoulders. She too had just wanted a peaceful life. "Hang in there. We'll get through it." Yet in the pit of her stomach, she sensed the subtle signs of a sophisticated intimidation tactic. A tactic she had seen in war-torn regions abroad, but never expected to see so blatantly here in Middle America. Cut off the target's normal lines of communication, tarnish their name, isolate them, and then strike. She decided to call an old friend that night, a buddy from her Delta days, now working with an intelligence firm. She'd see if he could gather any intel that local folks might be too scared or compromised to share. However, she never got the chance to place that call before tragedy struck. The phone rang close to 10 p.m. Ashaya, half drifting on the sofa, jolted awake. The voice on the other end was breathy, near panic. "Is this Ms. Hill? I'm sorry. This is Deputy Parnell from the Gerbera County Sheriff's Department. There's been an incident. We need you to come down to Route 9, near the orchard. Now." Her heart hammered. What happened? "I'll explain when you get here, ma'am. Just, please come quickly." She threw on a jacket, grabbed her truck keys, and all but sprinted out the door. Her mind raced. Arya had been out for a late coffee run with a friend from school, someone who lived in that direction. She forced herself not to panic. She was a trained soldier after all, used to crisis and the swirl of adrenaline, but this was different. This was personal. As she hurtled down the dark stretch of Route 9, headlights revealing little more than endless farmland and a peeling orchard sign, she spotted flashing red and blue lights up ahead. Her stomach twisted at the sight of at least 4 squad cars angled on the shoulder. She parked abruptly, barely registering the small crowd of onlookers. When she stepped out, a deputy attempted to block her path. "Ma'am, the scene is..." "My name is Ashaya Hill, fiancée of Arya. I got a call." The deputy swallowed, stepping aside. And that's when she saw Arya lying on the ground, illuminated by the strobe of emergency lights. A paramedic knelt by her side, shaking his head, pressing 2 gloved hands to the blossoming red stain on Arya's chest. For an instant, Ashaya's entire world tilted. She felt her vision narrow, her ears ring. Then she was moving forward with absolute clarity, dropping to her knees, ignoring the paramedic's protest. She pressed a trembling hand to Arya's cheek. No. "Arya? Baby, can you hear me?" A gurgling exhale was the only response. Ashaya's training roared to life. "We need an ambulance right now," she barked at the paramedic. "They're en route, ma'am. The bullet might have..." She refused to hear it. She pressed her palm to the wound, applying pressure. Blood oozed between her fingers. Arya's half-lidded eyes fluttered, but she didn't speak. Her lips formed a silent I. The paramedic touched Ashaya's arm. "She's going into shock." In the swirl of hysterical thoughts, Ashaya noticed the presence of another body on the ground several feet away. A middle-aged man, face ashen, a revolver still clutched in his hand. 2 uniformed deputies hovered over him. Ashaya recognized him from the local diner. Tony Presley, rumored to be one of the sheriff's new hires. Deputy Parnell crouched beside her, looking anguished. "I'm sorry. He claims he pulled her over for speeding, then she brandished a weapon, says he shot in self-defense, but there is no weapon on her. We don't..." He bit his lip. "I don't know if you'll get the real story." "Self-defense." The words tore from Ashaya. "That's impossible. She never..." A strangled noise escaped Arya's throat. Ashaya, desperation fueling her, leaned down and whispered, "Hold on, love. Breathe for me. Just breathe." Arya's eyes locked on hers for a final second, then her head lolled back. Everything else went silent. The paramedics' frantic attempts, the crackle of radio chatter, the onlookers' gasps. Ashaya felt the moment Arya slipped away and a piece of her own soul vanished. She sat there, numb, holding the lifeless body of the only person who had ever truly healed her spirit. Had she been an onlooker, she might have recognized the throbbing heartbreak across her own face, or the raw flash of unbridled rage that followed. But in that moment, all she could do was cradle Arya's body and choke down a scream so primal it threatened to shatter her. Deputy Parnell placed a hand on her shoulder. He looked terrified. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry." Then came the voice of a man stepping out of a black SUV. Sheriff Bartell himself, broad-chested, with a thick mustache and a face hardened by power. "What do we have here?" he asked in a flat monotone. The paramedic spoke quietly. "Female victim, gunshot to the chest, no pulse." Bartell nodded, stepping around with no apparent emotion. His eyes flickered over Ashaya. "You must be the fiancé," he said. My condolences. She glared at him through tear-glitted eyes, her anger momentarily swallowed by despair. She was still pressing Aria's chest as though she could stop her soul from escaping. Bartel cleared his throat. Deputy Presley claims the victim threatened him with a gun. He responded according to protocol. Deputy Parnell made a noise of protest. Sir, I didn't see any gun. Bartel cut him off. Parnell, you got a problem? Presley's a senior officer. If he says there was a gun, there was a gun. A fresh wave of fury surged in Ashaya. She rose abruptly, fists clenched, looming taller than the sheriff by at least 2 inches. He might not have known or cared about her past, but that wouldn't keep her from speaking. Aria never touched a gun in her life, she hissed. You're lying. A smirk tugged at Bartel's lips. Ma'am, I suggest you watch your tone. She almost lunged at him. The only thing that kept her in place was a sudden memory of Aria's warm hands, urging her not to let anger define her. She shook violently with grief. Bartel shrugged, turning to the onlookers. Seems like an unfortunate situation. Let's wrap up the investigation. Parnell, take Ms. Hill's statement, then release her. We'll handle it. Ashaya realized with horrifying clarity that handling it meant burying the truth. For a flicker of a second, old instincts told her to snap Bartel's neck right there, but she held back, just barely. She brushed past the sheriff, ignoring his tension, ignoring the hands that reached to restrain her. She knelt once more at Aria's side, tears falling hot and furious on still warm skin. The paramedic, looking helpless, gently closed Aria's eyes. If there had been any illusions about her new peaceful life, they were shattered. War had found her again in this quiet farmland, and she would never again pretend that it didn't exist. Grief pinned Ashaya to the darkness for a day or two. The typical procedure, visiting the morgue, identifying the body, rolled through her mind in a surreal haze. She barely slept. Her hands sometimes shook uncontrollably, struggling to grasp that Aria was truly gone. By the 3rd day, anger propelled her forward. A righteous anger that once fueled her on Black Ops missions overseas. She recognized this emotion, that lethal readiness. She just needed a plan. Gerbera County's official statement about the shooting was galling. Teacher, killed in tragic officer-involved incident. Suspect threatened an officer with a firearm. The local paper ran that headline next to a gentle photo of Aria, as if mocking her memory. Witnesses? There was no mention of actual eyewitnesses. Apparently no civilians had been present, just Presley's word against the dead. A neatly manipulated fiasco. Except Ashaya sensed a thread of truth somewhere. Deputy Parnell had seemed unsettled, not fully on board with Bartel's narrative. Maybe he had a conscience. Maybe not enough to stand up publicly, but enough that she saw the crack in the wall. She needed to find or create more cracks. She also saw a swirl of confusion among the townspeople. Aria was well loved by her students. A few teachers quietly offered condolences, but they all seemed terrified. The sheriff's influence evidently stretched across the entire county. 2 days after Aria's funeral, little more than a modest graveside service with only a handful of mourners allowed by Bartel's security policies, Ashaya drove to the one place she thought might offer some respite. A small community center run by Pastor Langley, a local activist who had previously invited Aria to lead a children's choir. Aria had never gotten the chance to do so. The center was located in the more diverse corner of town, near a boarded-up old convenience store. The building was squat, cinder block, and lined with small windows that let in meager sunlight. Pastor Langley, a tall African-American man in his 60s, greeted her with a warm but mournful expression. "My heart breaks for you, Sister Hill," he said solemnly, guiding her to a small office. "Aria's death. The children can't believe it. Neither can I." She sat stiffly in the wooden chair across from him. "I won't pretend I'm here for comfort, Reverend. I need help." He nodded. "I suspected as much." "You're going after them, aren't you?" She inhaled. "I want to blow this entire corrupt web wide open. But they control the county. They can twist any piece of evidence. I need to find a way that doesn't rely on local authorities." Pastor Langley steepled his fingers. "There's an FBI field office in the next state, maybe. But you'd need proof. Hard proof. She thought of her intelligence training, how to gather evidence systematically, but she had no official standing here, no legal authority. The entire county was compromised. She stared at the pastor. Any talk of hidden cameras in squad cars? Or maybe private recordings? He sighed. There's supposedly a dash cam requirement for officers, but the sheriffs claimed they malfunction half the time. People speculate those videos get lost if they contradict the official story. Of course, she muttered. What about the deputy that seemed uneasy that night? Parnell? Langley's gaze flickered. Young guy, my understanding is he's new, not from around here. Might not want to tarnish his career, but he might be open to telling you something if you corner him. The question is, how do you protect him from retaliation? I need more than just one deputy's statement. I need to create enough public pressure that even this county can't ignore it. Langley nodded slowly. If you reveal wrongdoing, the sheriff will crack down. He's got powerful allies. The district attorney, the county commissioner, you name it. I've tried to highlight smaller injustices in the past, and he's always found ways to silence me. Fines, building code violations, intimidation. An idea sparked in Ashaya's mind, a dark idea from her days behind enemy lines. Then we expose everything. We make them come after us all at once. She stood. Thank you, Reverend. And keep your ear to the ground. Let me know if you hear anything. He rose and clasped her hand. Sister Hill, be careful. Arya wouldn't want you to get yourself hurt. She forced a tight smile. Arya was about justice, and so am I. Ashaya's first step was to gather allies, even if they didn't know her ultimate plan. She returned home that night, scouring her address book for old teammates. She had to tread carefully. Some of them were still active in specialized roles, but a few were private citizens now, with certain skill sets that could help her. The only problem, her phone calls yielded minimal results. Many folks were too far away or had obligations. She realized, bitterly, she might be on her own. Then she remembered she had an old contact who'd turned to activism after leaving Delta Force. She dialed his number. Russell double-tapped Baker. He picked up. Ash? God, it's been a while. You still living out in that farmland? She tried to keep her voice from shaking. I need intel, Russell. My fiancé was shot and killed by a local deputy. They're covering it up. I suspect deeper corruption. There was a long pause on the line. Damn. I'm sorry for your loss. Are you sure it's a cover-up? I know it is. She had no weapon, no reason to be pulled over. They're forging evidence. I need background on the sheriff's department, the county's money trail, anything. Another pause. I'll see what I can do. Give me a couple days. Ashaya hung up, feeling a faint flicker of relief. If Russell came through, she'd have a lead. The second step, confrontation. She had to see Deputy Parnell. That meant going to the Lion's Den, the sheriff's office itself, a humble brick building next to the courthouse. She arrived midday, wearing a leather jacket, jeans, and an expression that dared anyone to challenge her. The deputy at the reception desk recognized her. Ms. Hill, can I help you? I'm here for Deputy Parnell, she said. I have a few follow-up questions about the accident report involving Arya Sullivan. He hesitated. Ma'am, that's an ongoing investigation. You might want to speak to Sheriff Bartell. Then kindly direct me to the sheriff, she said icily. He led her down a hallway to a door with frosted glass that read, Sheriff E. Bartell. She knocked once, and a gravelly voice grunted. Inside, Bartell lounged at a desk littered with paperwork. He looked up, his eyes narrowing in annoyance. What do you want? She crossed her arms. Answers. He slowly stood. Your fiancé's case is closed, Ms. Hill. We concluded that the officer acted in self-defense. I'm sorry for your loss. Her nostrils flared. I'd like to see the official evidence. Dashcam footage, ballistic reports. He barked a laugh. Our dashcam was malfunctioning. Ballistic reports are sealed. No reason to release them. The DA's office agreed. She inhaled, controlling her temper. The public has a right to transparency. Bartell stepped around the desk, looming. The public trusts my word. They also trust the DA, who's made it clear we aren't to discuss further. I'd advise you, Ms. Hill, to move on. She let out a slow breath. I won't. Did you really think you could murder my fiancé and face no consequences? A flicker of something, maybe fear, crossed Bartel's eyes before arrogance reasserted itself. I'd watch that language. Murder is a bold accusation. We are law enforcement. Tread carefully, or you'll find yourself behind bars for defamation or obstruction. Obstruction? I haven't even started. She shook her head. If you won't help me, I'll find other ways. She pivoted to leave, only to find Deputy Presley, the shooter, standing in the doorway, arms folded. He eyed her with a sneer. You lost something, ma'am? She locked eyes with him, remembering the night Aria died. A cold fury spread inside her. I lost everything thanks to you. He didn't reply, just kept sneering. The tension in the room felt like a lit fuse. Finally, Ashaya forced herself to move past him. She glanced around, hoping to spot Parnell or glean some crucial detail. Down another corridor, she caught sight of the younger deputy passing by. She darted quickly, calling after him. Deputy Parnell? He turned, startled. Ms. Hill, you shouldn't be back here. She lowered her voice. I just want to talk. 2 minutes. He chewed his lip, glanced around, then nodded. They slipped into an empty record room. Inside, rows of filing cabinets and the hum of an old fluorescent light enclosed them. Parnell spoke first in hushed tones. I'm sorry about what happened. I truly am. She recognized the strain in his voice. Then help me, she said. Tell me what you saw that night. He inhaled shakily. Presley claimed he saw a gun. I didn't. I'd swear there wasn't one, but Sheriff Bartel insisted. Next thing I know, a gun's found next to your fiancé's body. Not the type she'd carry, though. We never had a reason to pull her over. It was a targeted stop. Her throat tightened. You have to come forward. He shook his head, fear stark in his eyes. Bartel has connections everywhere. You don't know what he's capable of. People disappear, or evidence goes missing, or families get threatened. I'm sorry, but I can't be that hero. Ashaya felt frustration build. Then is there any proof? Did you see dashcam footage? He grimaced. I overheard rumors of a partial dashcam video on file, but Presley claims it was corrupted. The official statement is no footage. That's all I know. She studied him, evaluating if he was truly telling the truth. Look, you're complicit if you stay silent. Aria wasn't just some random victim, she was a good person. If you stand by and let them bury her memory under lies, he interrupted, a tremor in his voice. My parents rely on me. I can't lose this job. Bartel would destroy me. I'd never work in law enforcement again, possibly worse. She forced down a wave of disgust. Though she understood fear, it didn't excuse complicity. She stepped closer, voice low. If you change your mind, if your conscience wakes you up at night, you let me know, because I'm not stopping until these killers are behind bars. Parnell glanced at the door. I have to go. I'm sorry. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in that record room, fists clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. She wanted to blow the lid off Bartel's entire operation, but how? She had no direct evidence. The entire department was compromised or too terrified to act. She realized a single approach might fail. She needed a multi-pronged plan, something that targeted not only the local department, but also the political connections. She left the station, a dark promise forming in her mind. They had no idea who they were dealing with. She was an ex-Delta Force commander, trained to dismantle entire terrorist cells with half the resources. She had the cunning to plan, the discipline to see it through, and a personal motive that burned brighter than any cause she'd ever fought for. And she had no illusions about returning unscathed. Whether she would do it within the law or not was the question. That night, after restlessly pacing her house, Ashaya found herself rummaging through the closet. She pulled out a locked metal trunk, battered from years of hauling it around the world. Inside lay fragments of her old life, a few patches, a blade harness, some specialized equipment she'd kept legally. She ran her fingers over them, memories swirling. Her phone buzzed. She answered. Russell? His voice was tight. I found something, not pretty. You know that, Sheriff. He's part of a bigger machine. Allegations of extortion, intimidation, possible drug running. The locals call him squeaky clean, but behind the scenes, he's rumored to traffic stolen firearms. That's how he funds his re-election campaigns. Ashaya closed her eyes. And the DA's in on it, presumably. Likely. Sorry to say, but local law enforcement and the county officials are intertwined. The real puppet master might be a wealthy businessman in the region. Everett Carlyle. Heard of him? She shook her head, scanning her memory. No. Doesn't ring a bell. He's got holdings in farmland, trucking, warehousing, donates big to Bartell's campaigns. Word is Carlyle uses Bartell to ensure any problems vanish. Could be they saw Arya as a threat, especially if she uncovered some financial scheme. Ashaya's lips pressed into a thin line. So we're looking at an entire network. Great. Any official leads? Not exactly. They keep it hush-hush. If you try going to state police or FBI, you'll need bulletproof evidence. Bartell's known to have a line into certain circles that can sabotage your claim before it's heard. She exhaled heavily. Thanks, Russell. He paused. Ashaya, be careful. You sure you want to do this alone? Her response was crisp. I have no choice. She began staking out. Weeks of careful observation, as if planning an operation in a hostile region. She tracked the sheriff's daily patterns, from his drive to the station to his visits to a certain private property on the outskirts of Gerbera County, a warehouse near the train tracks, rumored to be Carlyle's. She also kept tabs on the district attorney, Malcolm Roth, noticing the late-night visits to a nondescript building downtown, possibly some hush-hush meeting with donors. Her main objective? Find physical proof, something that would tie them to corruption or wrongdoing, something bigger than just one murder, because the murder alone was apparently easy for them to bury. One crisp night, she parked her truck well beyond view and crept through the tall grass near Carlyle's warehouse. No cameras that she could see from the approach angle, though she suspected there were hidden ones. She had her night vision monocular from her old kit, scanning for guards. She counted 2 armed men near a side door, one near the front, a fence line that looked relatively new. She made her way to the back of the property, slipping through a gap in the fence. Near the loading bay, she saw uniformed county deputies. She recognized Presley among them. They were unloading crates from an unmarked truck. The overhead light flickered, casting them into partial darkness. Ashaya's heart hammered. What was in those crates? Drugs? Weapons? If she could document it, that might be a start. She slid her phone out, quietly recording a video. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. She whirled, silent, flattening herself against the side of the building. A guard wearing a black jacket strolled by, pistol at his hip, flashlight bobbing across the ground. She held her breath. Another step. Then he continued around the corner, none the wiser. She released a slow exhale, then carefully snapped a few photos. Presley had turned to speak with a tall, balding man in a suit. She didn't recognize the man, but by the authoritative stance, he could be Everett Carlyle himself. He lit a cigarette, the glow briefly illuminating his face. She recorded the moment. Footsteps advanced again. Someone else from inside the warehouse? She had to move. She retreated across the yard to her truck, adrenaline coursing through her. The entire drive home she could almost feel the old cold clarity returning, the mindset of a special ops soldier preparing for infiltration. But the reality was, she had meager evidence so far. Photos of a possible meeting, a crate being unloaded. It wasn't conclusive. She needed more. Still, it was a start. Days passed, and the tension in Gerbera County grew. There were whispers about Arya's shooting being a setup. A small group of locals, led by Pastor Langley, started a petition demanding an independent investigation. In response, the sheriff's department cracked down, ramping up safety checks that conveniently targeted protesters. At the next school board meeting, Arya's name was hardly mentioned. The official stance was that her death, though tragic, was an isolated incident. Furious, Ashaya resolved to make her own incident, one that no one could ignore. And then, out of nowhere, Deputy Parnell showed up at her doorstep late one evening, his expression soaked in fear. "They found out I talked to you." She ushered him inside, scanning the street for anyone watching. "How?" "I don't know." Presley started hinting that I was disloyal. The sheriff pulled me aside, threatened me. They basically said if I cause any more trouble, my family's done in this county. He squeezed his eyes shut, voice breaking. I can't keep this in anymore. What they did to Arya, it's wrong. She placed a hand on his arm. Look, if you're ready to talk, I can help you. But we have to be smart. He nodded shakily. There's a hidden file server at the station's data room. I know they keep backups of dashcam footage there, even the broken ones. I've only seen glimpses. But if there's any chance that the footage from that night was archived, it would be on that server. Her heart surged. Concrete evidence. We have to get it. Parnell swallowed. It's behind multiple locks. Keycard plus codes. Bartell changes them regularly. I can get you in, maybe. But if we're caught, she answered with a faint grim smile. We won't be. They spent the next hour strategizing. The station was mostly empty in the wee hours, but there was always at least one night clerk. Bartell's office might be locked. The data room had a specific security system. Before leaving, Parnell stared at her with a haunted expression. Why am I doing this? Because it's the right thing, she replied softly. And because I've lost the person I love most. No one else should have to suffer that. He bowed his head. Then let's hope we survive this. At 2 a.m. the next day, Ashaya parked a few blocks from the station. Dressed in black tactical pants, a dark hoodie, and boots with soft soles, she felt the adrenaline hum in her veins. This was what she had been trained for, low-key infiltration in an urban environment. Though urban here was just a small government building in a sleepy town, the tension was the same. Parnell arrived in his personal car, wearing civilian clothes. He hopped out, expression grim. The night clerk's usually a rookie, probably dozing in the back. They circled around back to a locked side entrance. Parnell swiped his key card, then entered a code on a keypad. The door clicked open. They slipped inside, greeted by the faint hum of fluorescent lights in the hallway. Ashaya listened intently for footsteps. She heard only distant murmurs from the front desk area. They moved quietly along the corridor toward the data room. The door there had a second keypad plus a card reader. Parnell motioned for her to wait while he swiped and typed. The overhead camera blinked, presumably recording. Once inside, she quietly pushed a metal stool under the door handle, jamming it shut. The data room was a small space lined with server racks. A desk with a computer rested on one side. Parnell breathed quickly, sweat glistening on his forehead. Hurry, he said. Ashaya moved to the keyboard. A prompt for credentials glowed on the screen. Do you know the login? Parnell shook his head. I only have partial access. She exhaled. Then let me. She had some hacking experience from certain missions. Enough to attempt a back door. She typed rapidly, pulling up a terminal, trying to exploit known vulnerabilities in older systems. The seconds ticked by with painful slowness. Footsteps outside the hallway. They both froze. The footsteps paused at the door, then continued. Ashaya resumed her furious typing. At last, she bypassed the local admin protections, obtaining partial control. The file directory was massive. She searched for keywords. Arya, Presley, Route 9. A folder popped up. Dashcam_S10_Presley. She opened it. Multiple video files. The ones from the date of Arya's shooting were labeled as corrupted. She attempted to play them. The media player stuttered, but she forced it to process. An image flickered. The hood of the squad car, the empty highway. Then Arya's face in the headlights, her hands clearly visible. No gun. Presley fired. The camera shook. Arya's body collapsed to the asphalt. The audio captured Presley cursing, saying, "Damn it! Where is the gun?" Then it cut out. Ashaya's heart hammered. Proof. She began copying the files to a flash drive. Suddenly a loud clang came from the hallway. Someone trying the door. A male voice called, "What's going on in there? The door's jammed." Parnell's eyes went wide. Ashaya motioned for him to keep quiet. She watched the progress bar crawl. 73%, 74%. The door rattled harder. "Parnell, is that you?" Parnell gripped Ashia's arm. "It's Darrow, another deputy. He'll radio for backup." Ashaya hissed. We need these files, another 10 seconds. She counted in her head, ignoring the pounding on the door. At last, the file finished copying. She yanked out the flash drive. Let's move. They shoved aside the stool. Deputy Darrow stumbled forward, nearly colliding with them. What the hell? Ashaya stepped behind him quickly, locking an arm around his neck in a controlled hold. Don't fight, she warned. Parnell's voice trembled. Sorry, Darrow. He pressed the muzzle of his own sidearm, unholstered as soon as the door opened, against Darrow's side. Ashaya slid out into the hall. Stay quiet or you'll get hurt, she told the stunned deputy. Darrow glared at Parnell, betrayal etched on his face, but he nodded stiffly. Fine, just... no one needs to die. Ashaya guided him into a storage closet and closed the door. She jammed a wooden wedge from her pocket under it, effectively trapping him. The two conspirators then hurried back toward the exit. The hallway, once quiet, now buzzed with alarm. They heard voices, the scuff of boots. Back door, Parnell whispered. They darted around a corner, nearly colliding with two more deputies. Ashaya dropped low, sweeping one's legs, while Parnell aimed his pistol at the second. Nobody move, he barked, voice cracking from nerves. The second deputy froze, hands half raised. The first deputy on the floor was disoriented, cursing. Ashaya disarmed him with practiced efficiency, sliding the gun across the tile so he couldn't grab it. Footsteps from behind. They were cornered. Her mind raced. They had to get out before Presley or Bartell arrived with lethal force. She grabbed Parnell's sleeve and yanked him into a side corridor that led to the staff lounge. From there they found a second side exit. They burst outside into the cold night air. An overhead lamp flickered. Ashaya scanned for police cruisers. 3 were parked in the lot's front. Sirens sounded from somewhere in the distance. They ran to her truck, hidden 2 blocks away. Inside, they were both panting, hearts pounding. Parnell said, "We're screwed. They'll know it was me." She jammed the key in the ignition. "Keep your head down. We have the footage. That's all that matters right now." As they sped off into the darkness, a half-dozen patrol cars roared past in the opposite direction, sirens screaming. She gritted her teeth, focusing on the road. She had the evidence, but now the real fight began, getting it out before they could silence her. They rendezvoused at a vacant old barn on the outskirts of the county, a place Parnell picked for secrecy. He slumped on a bale of straw, shoulders trembling. "I just committed career suicide." Ashaya plugged the flash drive into her laptop, verifying the files. "Yes, but you did the right thing." He laughed bitterly. "The right thing might get me killed. Bartell won't let this go." She pulled up the best video clip. Presley's face behind the wheel, the dash cam capturing Arya with her empty hands up, then Presley firing. The audio was chilling. The heartbreak of it nearly tore her open again, but she forced herself to remain stoic. "This is the truth," she said quietly. "Everything they tried to bury." Her phone rang. She saw an unknown number. Against her better instincts, she answered. Bartell's voice boomed in her ear. "Ashaya Hill, you just broke into a police facility and assaulted officers. That's a felony. Turn yourself in before you make it worse." Her pulse kicked. She forced a calm tone. "You murdered an innocent woman. I have proof." A pause, then he sneered. "We'll see how far that proof gets you." He hung up. She stared at the phone. "He knows. They'll be searching for us." Parnell slid a shaky hand across his face. "What do we do now? Send that video to the FBI?" She grimaced. "If we just send the video, Bartell's contacts might intercept it. I need to ensure it hits the public on a large scale, enough exposure that no one can hush it up." An idea formed. "We'll go to a local news station in the next county. I know a reporter there, Logan Carter. I did a segment on women veterans once. Carter's big on whistleblowers. If we can broadcast this footage, the people will react, and the FBI will have to step in." Parnell's eyes widened. "You think Bartell will let you stroll into a news station with that footage?" She gave a half smile. "He'll try to stop us. We just have to be smarter." He sighed. "You were Delta, right? That explains how calm you are about all this." Her eyes flashed with purpose. "I'm calm because I know exactly how to handle war." They parted ways. Parnell feared going home or to his parents' place. He'd endanger them. Ashaya offered him the small storage shed behind her house as a hideout, at least temporarily. He agreed reluctantly. Meanwhile, Ashaya drove to see Pastor Langley. She showed him the footage and the older man's mouth fell open in shock. "God help us," he breathed, tears shimmering in his eyes. That poor girl. She struggled to maintain composure. "Now you see, Arya never reached for a weapon. Presley murdered her. They're all complicit." He nodded. "I'll gather the community. We can protest, demand outside investigators." She put a hand up. "Careful. If Bartell panics, he'll crack down harder." He stared at the laptop screen again. "Maybe that's the point. Expose him fully. Let everyone see the tyranny. His men can't arrest the entire population." She wasn't entirely convinced. "Just be cautious, Reverend. My next step is to get this on the air. The second we do, Bartell will come for me. Maybe you too, if he suspects you helped. Let him try," Pastor Langley said quietly. "I've lived too long in fear. Arya's death is the last straw." Ashaya took a deep breath. "Then we move soon." That same afternoon, a pair of men in suits arrived at Ashaya's house, an older man with silver hair and a younger, tall man with dark glasses. They introduced themselves as special investigators from the state's attorney's office, wanting to ask clarifying questions about the break-in at the station. She recognized the pattern. Likely they were Bartell's stooges or Carlisle's men. She refused them entry. They pushed, claiming legal authority. She forced a polite but firm stance. "I have no comment. Please leave my property." When they tried to linger, she simply dialed a friend who was a state trooper from the neighboring county, someone not under Bartell's thumb. The men left quickly, muttering. The net was tightening. Bartell's people were probably monitoring her every move, so that night, she prepared carefully. She placed the original flash drive in a hidden nook behind her living room bookshelf. Then she made 3 additional copies, placing each in a sealed envelope. She mailed one to Russell Baker with a note. Insurance. She planned to hand-deliver another to the reporter, Logan Carter, the last she'd keep on her, just in case. She knew infiltration tactics. She also knew exfiltration, how to slip away undetected. But this time, she didn't intend to just slip away. She had to stand and fight, in her own quiet but relentless way. The next morning, she left the house at dawn, wearing jeans and a ball cap, hoping to avoid immediate detection. She chose back roads, heading west, far from the main highway. She didn't think the local cops had enough resources to track every route, but she couldn't be sure. An hour into her drive, she spotted a black SUV in the rearview mirror. It had no front plates, which struck her as unusual. She took a left turn onto a gravel farm road, observing if it followed. Sure enough, it turned. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. She pressed the gas pedal, dust kicking up behind her. The SUV accelerated too. She was done being prey. With a swift motion, she slid her phone onto the seat, set it to record audio just in case. Then she looked ahead, noticing a bend in the gravel road leading into a small copse of trees, perfect for an ambush if she needed it. She gunned the engine, then sharply turned, letting her truck fishtail into the trees. She parked behind a thick grove, engine still running, and jumped out. The old friend in her trunk was a short-stack shotgun, legally owned, with the barrel length just within state limits. She grabbed it, checked it swiftly, then ducked behind a trunk. Seconds later, the black SUV rolled into view. She counted 4 men inside. She recognized one, Deputy Presley in plainclothes. He stepped out, gun in hand, scanning the area. "She's here somewhere," he muttered. Another man emerged, tall and broad, cradling what looked like an assault rifle. This wasn't standard local police gear, possibly hired muscle. Ashaya's pulse hammered. She wasn't looking for a kill, but she sure wasn't letting them abduct or murder her. She had to think fast. If she let them trap her, the evidence would die with her. She needed to create a distraction. There, on the ground, lay a broken tree branch. She flung it toward a bush on the opposite side. It snapped a twig. The men whirled, focusing their aim. She capitalized on their confusion, darting out from behind her cover, leveling her shotgun. "Drop your weapons," she commanded in a thunderous voice. Presley spun. She fired a warning shot into the ground near his feet, sending dust spraying. He yelped, stumbling. The tall man whipped around, but she racked the shotgun again. "I said drop them!" Presley's eyes blazed with hatred. "You're a murderer, Hill. Just like you were overseas, huh? Once a killer, always a killer." She advanced a step. "I never killed innocents, unlike you." The tall man's rifle began to rise. She fired another round into his leg, a precise shot that took him down, howling in pain. Presley lunged behind the SUV door, returning fire with his sidearm. Bullets whistled by Ashaya, splintering bark. She dropped, rolling behind her truck. The other two men from the SUV, both armed, were pinned inside, apparently not eager to join the firefight. Ashaya's mind raced. She had a small advantage. They hadn't expected her to fight back so effectively, but she was outnumbered. She reached into the truck for her phone, cursing that she had no signal out here. Presley attempted a flank, circling behind a tree. She heard him panting, calling to the men inside the SUV. "Pin her down! I'll move in." She glimpsed the muzzle of a handgun near the trunk. Gritting her teeth, she popped up, fired one more shell that hammered the tree bark, forcing Presley to dive for cover. That gave her an opening. She leapt into the driver's seat, slamming the door, throwing the truck into reverse. Gunshots peppered the back panel as she peeled out, fishtailing through the gravel. The tall man she'd shot was on the ground, clutching his thigh. Presley and the others scrambled into the SUV, presumably to give chase. Her truck roared onto the main road, and she had a half-mile lead by the time the black SUV reappeared in her mirrors. Heart pounding, adrenaline flooding, she forced calm upon herself. She'd inflicted a serious blow. Presley would be more determined than ever to silence her now. But she'd survived. She made a beeline for the next county line. The plan to see Logan Carter couldn't wait. They were upping the stakes. She had to go public now. The county line was patrolled by a single, lonely state trooper post. She took advantage of that, pulling over near a diner, hoping the troopers there would protect her if Bartel's men tried something brazen. She hustled inside, ignoring the stares from a few patrons. She locked herself in the restroom and checked the flash drive hidden inside her wallet. Still there, thank God. She breathed deeply, gazing at her reflection in the restroom mirror. The faint lines of worry had deepened around her eyes. The death of Arya haunted her expression. She could almost hear Arya's voice, urging her to stay on the moral high ground, to remain the best version of herself. But that moral high ground was increasingly slippery. She'd nearly killed Presley in those woods. She told herself it was self-defense, which it was, but the line between righteous defense and lethal vengeance felt perilously thin. Gathering her resolve, she stepped out, found her phone half broken from the scramble. She used a payphone outside to call Logan Carter's station, requesting an urgent meeting. Carter wasn't immediately available, so she left a cryptic message. "This is Ashaya Hill. I have hard evidence regarding a police shooting in Gerbera County. If you want the story of a lifetime, meet me at Friedmont's parking garage, top level, in 2 hours." After that, she prayed Carter would check messages soon. She lingered at the diner, ordering a coffee she couldn't stomach. Then, precisely 1 hour and 45 minutes later, she drove to Friedmont's, a multi-level parking garage behind an old shopping mall. It was in the county seat, a place with heavy foot traffic, but enough corners for a discreet conversation. She parked on the top level, scanning for threats. Minutes ticked by. Then a green sedan pulled up, and Logan Carter, a lean man with a mop of ginger hair, stepped out. Ashaya exhaled in relief, though she scanned to ensure Carter wasn't followed. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly. Carter adjusted his glasses, eyeing her rumpled clothes and anxious demeanor. "Miss Hill, I recall your interview about female veterans. I'm sorry to hear about your fiancée. It's all over the local news." She swallowed hard. She was murdered by a deputy, and the sheriff's covering it up. "I have dashcam footage that proves it." He stared, astonished. "That's a big claim. If it's real, we're talking about implicating an entire sheriff's department." She handed him a small USB stick. "I want you to run it on air, Carter. It's the only way. The local system is compromised." He looked unsettled but resolute. "If the footage is genuine, my station can do a short investigative piece. But you realize, we'll need time to vet it. They'll want confirmations. This might not air overnight." She nodded, frustration simmering. I understand. Just do it soon or they'll bury it. And me, he nodded. Give me 24 hours. Suddenly, tires screeched below. Instinct overcame her. We've got company. Stay behind me. She gestured for him to move behind a concrete pillar. She peered over the ledge to see an unmarked black sedan pulling in, and 4 men in suits fanning out, heading up the stairwell. They looked nothing like local deputies. Probably Carlisle's men. Carter's eyes went wide. What do we do? She quickly pulled him to the ramp leading downward. We'll slip out the rear exit. If I can distract them, you get away. Keep that flash drive safe. He paled. But you? She gripped his arm fiercely. You're the only one who can blow this wide open. Go. Reluctantly, Carter nodded, taking off in a crouch run. Meanwhile, Ashaya stepped back behind a parked SUV. She had no firearm on her now. The shotgun lay stowed in her truck, which was across the lot. She improvised, grabbing a tire iron from the SUV's cargo bed. The men emerged, scanning the top deck. A husky man with a deep voice barked, "Spread out! She's here!" Ashaya crouched behind the SUV. She heard footsteps approaching from the left, more from the right. They were boxing her in. She breathed in, exhaled slowly, then waited until she glimpsed a pair of expensive loafers stepping into view. She swung the tire iron low, hooking the man's ankle. He yelped and fell. She darted forward, delivering a precise chop to his neck, knocking him momentarily unconscious. The other 3 converged. She pivoted behind a sedan. One fired a silenced pistol. These men were clearly not amateurs. She dropped, letting the bullet embed in metal. Then she hurled the tire iron at him. He jerked to the side, deflecting it, but it gave her the split second to charge. She grabbed his wrist, twisted, forcing the gun out of his grip, and hammered his jaw with her elbow. He staggered. A 3rd man rushed in, brandishing a baton or some heavy club. She barely dodged a swing that might have cracked her skull. Before she could counter, the 2nd man recovered, tackling her from behind. She sprawled onto the concrete, pain ripping through her. They pinned her arms. The 3rd raised the club. "Bartell says we finish her," he hissed. She gritted her teeth. Summoning a reservoir of strength, she slammed her head backward into the 2nd man's face. He roared in pain, loosening his grip. She rolled free just as the baton came crashing down, striking the ground instead. She snatched up the fallen pistol, only to discover it jammed or safetied. Another blow from the baton forced her to block with her forearm. She hissed as agony seared her arm, but she managed to pivot, hooking the baton under her elbow, and wrenched it from his hands. One fluid strike to the temple with the baton, and the 3rd man collapsed. The 2nd man cursed, blood streaming from his nose. She glared at him, muzzle of the jammed gun pointed as if ready to shoot. He froze. She suspected he didn't realize it was jammed. "Back off," she rasped, voice thick with anger. "Tell Bartell and Carlisle I'm not dying so easily." He raised his hand slowly, fear flickering in his eyes. Then, in a burst of bravado, he lunged. She sidestepped, snapping the baton against his kneecap. He dropped like a stone, howling. Her muscles screamed in pain, but she rushed to check that Carter had escaped. Looking over the ledge, she saw his green sedan pulling away, no sign of pursuit. Relief flooded her. The evidence was safe, heading to the station. She staggered to her own truck, ignoring the bruises forming on her limbs, ignoring the swirl of questions about who these men were and whether they'd chase Carter. For now, she'd done what she could. But she knew the clock was ticking. If the footage aired soon, Bartell would be cornered, and a cornered predator was the most dangerous. True to his word, Carter began verifying the footage. He called her that evening. "We're going to run a teaser tonight at 11, full piece tomorrow at 6. There's enough there for a bombshell. The station is doubling up security." She exhaled, tears briefly stinging her eyes. At last, the truth about Arya's murder would see the light. "Thank you," she whispered. He paused. "I just hope we're safe until broadcast. My editor is in contact with the State Attorney General's office. They've hinted at sending investigators if the story is credible." "Stay vigilant," she warned. "Bartell and Carlisle won't go down quietly." That night, at the community center, about 20 people gathered. teachers, local families, Pastor Langley, and even a few farmhands who'd heard rumors of corruption. They formed an impromptu vigil for Arya, lighting candles in front of her photo. Then Langley cleared his throat. "We have new information, everyone." "Miss Hill, do you want to speak?" Ashaya, who'd never been much for public speaking, stepped forward. She swallowed her apprehension. "Arya Sullivan was my fiancée. She was shot in cold blood by Deputy Presley, who claimed she was armed, which was a lie. I have footage proving the sheriff's department lied. A local news station will broadcast it soon." A stunned hush, then muffled exclamations. One teacher, voice trembling, asked, "What does that mean for us, for the town?" "It means," Ashaya said, "that Bartell and Carlisle and their network are about to be exposed. They may lash out before that happens. Be careful. Don't let them intimidate you." A middle-aged woman raised a trembling hand. "They threatened my nephew last year. He worked at a Carlisle warehouse, refused to keep quiet about the stolen goods. They fired him, blacklisted him. Bartell's deputies harassed him until he left town." Another voice. "We can't all leave. This is our home." Pastor Langley stood, face filled with resolve. "Then we take our home back. Starting tomorrow, we will protest at the courthouse, demanding accountability. We will stand together. They cannot silence us all." Ashaya felt a flash of worry. Bartell might respond with violence, but she recognized also the power of unified community. She nodded in agreement. "I'll stand with you." At dawn, about 50 residents lined the courthouse steps, signs reading "Justice for Arya," "No more corruption, we demand accountability." Despite the early hour, a small crowd grew. Ashaya saw teachers, retirees, even teenagers. The local newspaper snapped pictures. A wave of courage rippled through them. Then the sheriff's cruisers rolled up. Bartell himself stepped out, flanked by Presley and several armed deputies. The tension crackled. Bartell addressed them with a bullhorn. "This gathering is unlawful assembly. Disperse immediately." Langley calmly countered, "We have the right to protest peacefully, Sheriff." Bartell's gaze flicked over the crowd, spotting Ashaya. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Last warning, disperse, or we will make arrests." No one moved. Some in the crowd shouted, "You're the criminal, Bartell," or "We know the truth." Bartell growled. Presley read them the riot act. Presley stepped forward with a paper. "According to county ordinance, more than 20 persons gathering without a permit constitutes a breach of perimeter." An uproar. Someone yelled, "We don't need a permit to stand on public property." Ashaya tensed, half expecting the deputies to start swinging batons or opening fire. But Bartell, aware of potential optics, merely barked, "Arrest the ringleaders." Deputies advanced, cuffing Pastor Langley and 2 others, who'd stepped forward. Ashaya stepped in front of them, arms raised. "Don't do this," Presley sneered. "I've waited to see you in cuffs, Hill." Suddenly, sirens approached from an unexpected direction. State police vehicles, half a dozen, screeching to a halt. A tall lieutenant jumped out, raising a loudspeaker. "Stand down, Sheriff Bartell. This area is now under the jurisdiction of the state." A ripple of shock. Bartell spun, livid. "What the hell do you mean? I'm the elected law here." The lieutenant, a stern-faced woman, stepped forward, brandishing official documents. "Emergency order from the Attorney General's office, triggered by an investigative report that aired at midnight." She shot a pointed look at Bartell. "We have reason to believe your department is involved in a criminal conspiracy, and we're here to ensure no further abuses." A roar of applause erupted from the crowd. Ashaya's heart soared with relief. Logan Carter must have run a teaser piece ahead of schedule. The footage had gone public. Bartell tried to argue, but the lieutenant wasn't budging. "You can take that up with the AG's investigators. Meanwhile, your deputies will stand down. No arrests will be made at this protest." Fuming, Bartell motioned to Presley. "We're leaving." Presley, eyes ablaze, glared at Ashaya. "This isn't over," he hissed. The protesters cheered as the state police essentially escorted Bartell's men away. Pastor Langley was uncuffed, the rest of the detainees freed. The vigil turned protest remained peaceful under the watch of the newly arrived troopers. Ashaya quickly found an opportunity to slip away from the crowd. relief mixing with caution. She dialed Parnell's phone. No answer. She texted him. The footage aired. They're cornered. Be careful. Moments later, her phone rang with an unknown number. She answered. Hello? A shaky male voice. I have Deputy Parnell. If you want him alive, come to the old meatpacking plant on Route 22 in 1 hour. No cops, or he's dead. Her blood ran cold. Who is this? Click. The line went dead. They had taken Parnell. Probably Presley or Carlisle's men. She felt a surge of guilt for dragging him into this. But she also knew that going in alone was a trap. Yet, Parnell's life hung in the balance. Time was short. She called Pastor Langley, asked if he could covertly get word to the state police. He insisted on sending them. But she realized the kidnappers explicitly said no cops. They'd kill Parnell at the first sign of a uniform. So she decided to do it alone. This time she fully embraced her training. She donned a black tactical outfit she had stashed, complete with bulletproof vest, night vision goggles, a couple sidearms she legally owned, plus the short-barreled shotgun. She loaded everything with a calm precision. She also wrote a note, pinned to her fridge. If I don't return, the sheriff or Carlisle was behind it. The truth is out. Keep fighting. Under the cover of twilight, she arrived at the abandoned meatpacking plant on Route 22. The building was a sprawling structure of rusted metal, broken windows, and old signage that read Farm Fresh Meats. She parked behind a row of dumpsters, scanning the perimeter with night vision. She spotted 3 armed men patrolling outside. Could be more inside. Her jaw tightened. She crept forward, hugging the building's side. A single overhead light glowed above a door. She heard muffled voices. Presley's sneering tone. I told you we'd flush her out. That do-gooder deputy was the perfect bait. Then a whimper, likely Parnell. She had to move carefully. She spied a ladder leading to the roof. She ascended silently. Up top, she found a skylight, its glass partially shattered. She peered inside to see a grimy, cavernous room. Below, Presley was there indeed, along with at least 4 others. Parnell was bound to a chair, bruises on his face, gagged. She measured the distance, about 20 feet to the ground. She could drop in, but then she'd be outnumbered. Alternatively, she could slip in from a side window, pick them off. She weighed her options. The men inside were discussing how Bartell was holed up somewhere, trying to salvage his reputation, but Carlisle demanded that they handle this fiasco quickly. If Ashaya died mysteriously, maybe they could spook the station into retraction. Well, they weren't going to get that chance. She quietly climbed down the opposite side, found a window partially ajar. She slid into a cluttered hallway. The stench of old meat and chemicals lingered, gag-worthy. She cleared each corner methodically, Delta training in full force. Suddenly, footsteps approached from behind. A guard. He must have circled around. She pressed herself into a dark alcove, waiting. As he passed, she caught him in a chokehold, silently bringing him down. She relieved him of his sidearm, then zip-tied his wrists. No alarm raised yet. Good. She advanced on the main chamber, hearing Presley's voice echo. I don't care if the state police are in town. We do this now. Carlisle wants results. One of the men asked. We sure he'll come alone? She might bring those troopers. Presley scoffed. Nah, she's ex-Delta, remember? She'll want to handle it herself. She's that arrogant. Ashaya clenched her jaw. She recognized Presley's deep hatred. She took a breath, then lobbed a small flashbang from her old stash into the open doorway. The device exploded in a flash of light and deafening noise. She swept inside, shotgun raised. The men reeled, covering their faces, disoriented. She struck quickly. One man lunged blindly at her. She smacked him with the butt of her shotgun. Another fumbled for his gun. She fired a round into his shoulder, dropping him. She pivoted, scanning for Presley. The smoke from the flashbang hung in the air. She heard Presley cursing. Then muzzle flashes lit the gloom as bullets zipped by. She dove behind a concrete pillar. Spread out, Presley shouted, voice ragged. Don't let her pin us down. Ashaya saw Parnell in the center of the room, still tied to a chair, eyes wide in panic. She needed to get him safe. She racked her shotgun. fired at a silhouette that moved to flank her. The figure collapsed with a pained cry. Presley advanced from the other side. She recognized his shape, but he ducked behind a metal rack. Time slowed. She heard Parnell's muffled moan, heard the scramble of men trying to reorganize. She had to neutralize them quickly before they cornered her. She dropped the empty shotgun, switching to her sidearm. She crawled under a half-broken conveyor belt, emerging behind a stack of crates. Two men regrouped near Parnell. They had guns aimed at him, presumably threatening to kill him if she moved. She let her Delta training guide her. She inhaled, rose swiftly, and fired precisely 2 shots. Each man went down before they could react. She rushed forward, sliding behind Parnell's chair, using it as partial cover. "You okay?" she hissed, ripping the gag away. He nodded frantically, tears in his eyes. "Watch out!" She spun, pistol raised, just as Presley fired. The bullet grazed her vest, knocking the wind out of her, but not penetrating. She returned fire, but he was already diving behind a steel support beam. A final thug from behind a crate took aim at Parnell. Ashaya saw the muzzle flash, dived across Parnell's lap, and fired 3 times. The thug crumpled. Now it was just Presley. She heard him breathing heavily in the gloom. She crouched, mind racing. She had the advantage, but Presley was cunning, fueled by desperation. She decided to call out, voice echoing, "It's over, Presley. The state police are here. The public knows the truth." His laughter was hollow. "Think that matters? I'm not going to prison. This county was ours. You had to poke your nose in." She stepped quietly along the perimeter, scanning for movement. He was behind the steel beam, reloading. Then he emerged, gun raised. They locked eyes. She fired first, but her gun clicked. Out of ammo. He sneered, pulling the trigger. Nothing. He had jammed. A fraction of a second of mutual shock. He roared, charging at her. They collided in a flurry of fists and elbows. He was strong, driven by fury, but she was trained, fueled by a cause. She parried his strikes, delivered a crushing elbow to his collarbone. He gasped. She pivoted behind him, hooking an arm around his neck. Presley flailed, slamming her against the crates. Pain burst in her ribs. She tightened the choke, ignoring the agony. "Confess," she hissed in his ear. "Admit you killed her." He spat, half-choked. "I only followed orders." She stuck her nose. She yanked him backwards, cutting off his words. He sputtered, losing consciousness. For a second, she pictured Arya's body, lifeless on that cold asphalt. Her wrath flared. She could end him right here with a twist of her arms. But a voice in her mind, the memory of Arya, pleaded for mercy, for justice. She forced herself to release the choke as he went limp. He slumped to the ground, breathing raggedly. Ashaya retrieved a discarded set of handcuffs, snapped them around Presley's wrists. Then she turned to Parnell, untying him. He nearly collapsed into her arms. "Thank you," he croaked. She just nodded, every muscle trembling. The place was a mess of fallen men, moaning or unconscious. Presley lay face down, cuffs tight. Blue and red lights flickered through the grimy windows. She heard sirens, tires screeching. The state police had arrived, likely tipped off by the gunfire or a call. Parnell exhaled a shuddering breath. "We're safe now?" Ashaya sank to her knees, the adrenaline fading. "Yes," she whispered. "For now." The fallout was swift and intense. Presley was taken into custody, along with the wounded or subdued men. The state police found evidence in their vehicles linking them to Carlisle and, by extension, the sheriff. Within 48 hours, Sheriff Bartell was arrested at Carlisle's mansion, where both men had barricaded themselves, presumably trying to negotiate a deal with higher powers. The footage, plus the kidnapping, plus statements from Parnell and other terrified deputies, broke open the entire conspiracy. Even the DA, Malcolm Roth, was indicted on obstruction and conspiracy charges. For Gerbera County, it was a reckoning unlike anything in living memory. Town meetings were filled with anger and tears, revelations of hidden crimes, bribes, and intimidation. Victims came forward in droves with stories of property seized or family members framed. Meanwhile, Ashaya found herself both hailed as a hero and questioned by investigators for her methods. The state attorney general recognized her infiltration at the station was illegal, but they also acknowledged she had uncovered massive corruption. Ultimately, charges against her were dropped, considered overshadowed by the extreme circumstances and her critical whistleblowing role. Presley, Bartell, Carlisle, and others faced a laundry list of charges. Early statements from Presley incriminated Bartell as the one who gave the direct order to take care of that meddling teacher. That was all Ashaya needed to confirm her worst suspicions. Aria's murder was planned. The grief stabbed her heart anew, but she found a grim satisfaction in seeing them face justice. The official inquest into Aria's death concluded that the shooting was unjustified homicide, a posthumous exoneration, little comfort, but it meant her name was cleared. The community center staged a memorial concert in Aria's honor, at which Pastor Langley and the children's choir performed the songs Aria once taught them. Ashaya stood at the back, arms folded, tears threatening. She wished Aria could see it, see the unity, see the difference her courage made, if only she hadn't paid the ultimate price. When the final notes of the choir piece drifted into silence, the applause and candlelight bathed the room in gentle reverence. Ashaya slipped out, her emotions too raw. She retreated to the courtyard, gazing at the star-littered sky. She sensed footsteps behind her. Deputy Parnell wearing a plain shirt, no badge. He had resigned from the sheriff's office, plans to move back to his home state. "Mind if I join you?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. They stood in silence, the moonlight casting shadows across the building. At length, Parnell spoke, voice trembling with gratitude. "You saved my life." She offered a small nod. "You saved mine too, by getting that footage. I'm sorry you had to give up your career." He shrugged, eyes distant. "Maybe it's for the best. I want to be in law enforcement somewhere with integrity, or maybe I'll do something else entirely." She considered him. "Whatever you do, thank you. You did the right thing." He gave a bittersweet smile. "Aria was a wonderful teacher from what I've heard. The kids still mourn her." Ashaya swallowed, tears pricking her eyes. "She was more than I could ever describe." They fell into a companionable silence, each grappling with the aftermath of so much pain. The next morning, in a quiet ceremony at the county courthouse, the new acting sheriff and a few state officials held a press conference. They recognized Aria as a victim of police corruption, announcing that a scholarship for aspiring music teachers would bear her name. Ashaya listened from the back, chest tight. Afterwards, a local reporter tried to interview her. She politely declined. She'd done enough. She had given her statement to the state and FBI investigators. Now the county was on the path to healing. Painful, but necessary. In the following weeks, a swirl of legal battles ensued. Bartell and Carlisle unleashed their lawyers, but the evidence was overwhelming. Public sentiment was fully against them. The district attorney tried to bargain for a lesser sentence by flipping on Bartell. Regardless, conviction seemed inevitable. One day, Logan Carter approached Ashaya in front of the courthouse, microphone in hand. "Ms. Hill, with the trials nearing conclusion, do you have any comment on how Gerbera County can move forward?" She paused, fiddling with the memory ring she still wore from Aria. "They move forward by remembering all that's happened, by making sure there's transparency in law enforcement, accountability in office, and community support for one another. My fiancé believed in teaching kids not just music, but empathy, fairness. I hope the new leaders can uphold that." Carter nodded, stepping aside. She walked away, uncertain of her own future. She stayed in Gerbera County for the time being, finishing the fight. Eventually, the trials concluded, with guilty verdicts. Sheriff Bartell, Presley, Carlisle, and the DA each faced hefty sentences, ensuring they wouldn't terrorize the county again. The Department of Justice took interest, leading to deeper investigations into the region's corruption. Through it all, Aria's spirit lingered. Her name was etched into a scholarship plaque at the revived community center. A mural depicting her gentle smile and bright eyes was painted on the school's outer wall, so every child entering would see a reminder of what compassion and courage look like. On a cool autumn morning, almost a year after Arya's death, Ashaya found herself standing at a modest headstone beneath a maple tree in the local cemetery. The leaves were tinged red and gold, the breeze carrying a faint whisper that felt like Arya's presence. She knelt, placing a single white rose, Arya's favorite color. "It's done," she murmured, voice trembling. "They're in prison. The county's purging its corruption. The kids still miss you. I miss you." A tear slipped down her cheek. She closed her eyes. "I wish you could see the difference you made. People are coming together, planting seeds of justice. And me? I'm still finding my way. But your light guides me." She stood, inhaling deeply. A sense of calm, bittersweet but steady, settled in her heart. She had not chosen the path of pure vengeance. She had fought for justice, yes, sometimes with violence forced upon her, but always anchored by a moral code, one she learned from Arya, and from the best parts of her own experience in the field. As she left the cemetery, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the path. It felt like a sign. Though the world was flawed and corruption could sprout anywhere, there was always hope in those determined to stand against it. For Ashaya Hill, the deadliest Delta Force commander turned reluctant crusader, the war had ended, at least for now. She'd keep Arya's memory alive by continuing to champion the values that her fiancé embodied: love, truth, and the courage to stand firm in the face of injustice. Because that was what real strength looked like. And though she had parted with her uniform a lifetime ago, she carried in her heart the unwavering resolve of a soldier, to protect, to serve, and, when necessary, to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Because real peace, she finally understood, wasn't the absence of war, but the presence of true justice.